He still didn't care. Shockingly, he punched me, then grabbed me by my collar and began pulling me out of the venue. Everyone stood up. I was protesting loudly and trying to get his hand off my collar, but his grip was too tight. Two of my colleagues came in and held me.
Let go of him, you evil man! Can't you see this is his sister's funeral?
Rather than listen to the man, Mr. Thompson slapped him. Everyone was shocked. More of my colleagues stepped in, and after much struggle, I was finally separated from Mr. Thompson.
You've suffered us enough? How can you be so heartless and insensitive? This is the last straw for you. We're going to deal with you.
Before I knew it, they pounced on him. Mr. Thompson received blows and slaps from different sides. I was afraid of them killing him, so I stepped in and managed to stop them. Get out of here now before we hurt you even more. Hey there, I'm Steven. I graduated from college about 8 years ago. Those first 2 years after college were tough. I was jobless and desperate to land a gig. My folks offered their connections, but I held out. They'd carved out impressive careers, promising a surefire job if I relented. Yet, I craved the satisfaction of finding my own path. Luck smiled eventually. A marketing role opened up in a top-tier company, ranked among the state's wealthiest. The interview? Brutal. A swarm of candidates vying for that golden ticket. My results dazzled the interviewers, sealing the deal. Finally, a job. The relief was palpable, but reality soon diverged from my daydreams. Friendships were forbidden. I learned to cope with that. And there was Mr. Thompson, the manager. Manager by title, bully by nature. I made sure to avoid him as best as I could. Mr. Thompson prioritized his ego over anything else. And of course, the company's profit. He forced us to work so hard to keep his position. What had once seemed like a dream job now felt like just a paycheck. But could I leave? No. I knew it would be hard trying to get a good job if I left, so I stayed. My friends marveled at my success without knowing what I had to face behind the camera. I mean, I did understand them. Within 3 years of working at the company, I got a house, and for myself. People would think I was having all the fun with my job. Once, in my 4th year working there, the company faced a season of loss. It was even tougher for us because Mr. Thompson nearly brought down the building when he got scolded by the CEO.
You incompetent lots. What more can I do to make you stupid things smart? Did you mock me when you heard the CEO reprimanding me for being incompetent? Did it make your rotten hearts dance happily?
Luckily, the loss season was soon replaced by profits, and calmness returned to the company. After we bounced back to profitability, my mind churned with new ideas. I felt a deep urge to contribute to the company's future, to prevent another setback like the one we had just faced. So, I set to work drafting a plan. When I finally had a solid plan in hand, I braced myself and approached Mr. Thompson's office. I had encountered his wrath before, especially on those days when his frustration with the workforce reached its zenith. But I was determined. I knew that if the CEO liked my idea, it could mean a promotion or a significant bump in salary. His eyes bore into me, like daggers as I entered.
What are you doing here?
His tone was scary. It was cold and cutting as always, sending a shiver down my spine. I placed the carefully prepared file on his desk and launched into my presentation without hesitation. When I finished, he simply took the file from my hands and dismissed me with a curt instruction to wait for his response. Well, you can imagine my surprise when, 2 weeks later, a meeting was held. There, the CEO praised Mr. Thompson and announced an increment in his salary for helping the company avoid another loss with his brilliant ideas. I was pissed because Mr. Thompson had used my work. I nearly cried. Mr. Thompson lied about working his ass out to draft the file. I wanted to scream so badly that he was lying, but I couldn't. I let it go, but I washed my hands off, trying to find solutions to the company. I'd made a mistake, and I wasn't going to repeat it. 2 months later, my younger sister fell sick and had to be rushed to the hospital. My sister was the only sibling I had, and she was precious to me. When I got the news about her admission to the hospital, I was devastated. I couldn't see her until Friday night. When I eventually did, my heart sank. She looked so bad that I was brought to tears. According to my parents, she'd been ill for a few weeks before she finally had to be brought to the hospital. I stayed there the whole weekend, cleared the bills, and begged the doctors to help her. They assured me that she would be fine. well, it didn't turn out that way. A week later, news reached me that my sister had died in her sleep. I was at the office when I received the news. My heart shattered as I burst into tears. My colleague Ghost comforted me after learning about what happened. It was a sad moment in our department. After crying, I left for Mr. Thompson's office. I wanted to request an early departure. "I'm sorry for bothering you, sir. I just received news about my sister's death, so I really need to leave right now." I was crying again. I felt so weak and defeated, like my whole life happiness has been taken from me. All I wanted to do was go to my family and cry with them. I wanted to see my sister before she got moved to the morgue. But my boss had other plans.
How's it any business of mine if your sister died? People die every minute, Mr. Steven. You're not leaving this company just because you lost your sister. She's dead. There's no point being all strong and loyal to a dead person.
I nearly punched him for the nonsense he was spewing. How could he be so insensitive? I stormed out of the office. The others saw my mood and immediately guessed what had happened.
Mr. Thompson is so evil. How could he?
I already knew he wouldn't let him leave.
All I could do was cry. My parents and friends were calling, but I couldn't bring myself to pick up. I couldn't tell them my boss had restricted me from leaving even after hearing about the death of my sister. I managed to stay through the remaining hours. Once it was time to leave, I grabbed my things and ran out. I drove straight to the hospital, just in time before my sister got taken to the morgue. I cried so much until I passed out. The next day, I didn't go to work. All I wanted to do was mourn my sister. I missed nearly 20 calls from Mr. Thompson, but I didn't care to return it. 2 days later, I got the CEO's contact from one of my colleagues, and I reached out to him. He was quite furious about why I didn't speak to Mr. Thompson instead, but I apologized without an excuse. I didn't want to paint Mr. Thompson black, even though he already was. After I explained my predicament to him, the CEO expressed his condolences and granted me 3 weeks to mourn and bury my sister. I thanked him in tears. He also sent me some money as his form of sympathy. My sister's funeral was scheduled for Sunday, 2 weeks later. I'd invited all of my colleagues, and none was against attending. On that day, I felt safe. Seeing my family, friends, and colleagues there made me feel safe. I cried even more as she was being lowered to the ground. The realization of never seeing my sister again hit me so badly that I burst into tears again. When the priest started praying, I heard the doors of the hall suddenly flung open. I turned to see Mr. Thompson.
How dare you? How dare you leave the company for more than 2 weeks? Are you crazy? Is your bloody father the CEO?
"I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson, but it's my only sibling who died. I can't work because I'm not in the right state of mind. Also, the CEO is in support of this." He still didn't care. Shockingly, he punched me, then grabbed me by my collar and began pulling me out of the venue. Everyone stood up. I was protesting loudly and trying to get his hand off my collar, but his grip was too tight. 2 of my colleagues came in and held me.
Let go of him, you evil man. Can't you see this is his sister's funeral?
Rather than listen to the man, Mr. Thompson slapped him. Everyone was shocked. More of my colleagues stepped in, and after much struggle, I was finally separated from Mr. Thompson.
You've suffered us enough? How can you be so heartless and insensitive? This is the last straw for you. We're going to deal with you.
Before I knew it, they pounced on him. Mr. Thompson received blows and slaps from different sides. I was afraid of them killing him, so I stepped in and managed to stop them. "Get out of here now before we hurt you even more." His face was swollen, and he had bruises all over his body. His clothes were torn.
You will all regret this.
We watched as he limped away. I apologized to my colleague, but they stopped me. According to them, Mr. Thompson deserved it. The next day, I heard that none of them went to work. Words had spread about what Mr. Thompson did, and everyone there refused to work if Mr. Thompson wasn't fired. The CEO called me to inquire what happened, and I told him everything. How he barged into my sister's funeral, how he's been harassing the workers and making us uncomfortable, including how he'd stolen my idea and got rewarded for it. The CEO was shocked. He promised to fire Mr. Thompson and begged us to be at work early the next day. We agreed. When we got there the next morning, we noticed the CEO's absence and only saw Mr. Thompson. He ordered all of us to gather in the hallway and we obeyed.
You stupid things, how dare you? I'm going to deal with every one of you for this. I should still be nursing my wounds, but the CEO asked to see me. Watch how he's going to make all of you dimwits pay for this.
The CEO was behind him while he was saying that. When he showed himself, Mr. Thompson was shocked. The CEO lashed out at him mercilessly. After nearly 20 minutes of raining insults on him, the CEO faced us. He apologized for Mr. Thompson's behaviors over the years.
You're fired, Mr. Thompson. I don't want to ever see you near this premises. Return the key to the company car you were given. Let go of the house too. You're dismissed.
Mr. Thompson was defeated. He walked out of the company with his head down. Mr. Thompson had a house of his own, beside the one the company gave him. The previous day, 2 of my colleagues had gone there and burnt it down. His neighbors could have informed him, but they all hated him because of how bad he was to them. They watched the house and the cars in it burn. After Mr. Thompson left the company, he went straight there, but was met with the ruins of his properties. The man broke down in heavy tears. Meanwhile, in the company, the CEO apologized to us again. I got the bonus and promotion I deserved, and a better person was brought in as the manager. A week and a few days later, we heard that Mr. Thompson had been rushed to the hospital after suffering a heart attack. He tried to buy another house, but fell into the hands of scammers who scammed him of nearly all his savings, leaving him broke and homeless. While he was at the hospital, his wife used the remaining money they had to rent a small apartment. When Mr. Thompson was discharged and went to the house, he went wild with rage. In the middle of yelling and stomping his feet, he fainted and had to be rushed to the hospital again. He was in coma. Until now, he hasn't woken up. Well, karma did work, hand in hand with us. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment down below saying I subscribed, and we will try our best to reply to your comment. On the day he got home, I put the drug in his tea and made him drink it all. We left soon after and waited for it to begin working. We knew it would be like 4 hours later. The CCTV was connected to my phone, so I could watch and listen to everything happening at his house. 4 hours later, I began watching it. My dad had passed out in the living room. Linda tried to wake him up by slapping him, which was very surprising, but he didn't budge. Rather than call out for help, Linda began jumping excitedly. After her little celebration, she called someone on a video call. It was a man.
The old fool is dead, baby. We're rich.
She'd been deceived into believing that my dad is dead, and he changed his will. When my dad introduced Linda to us as his girlfriend, we all thought it was one of his silly pranks. My name is Sean, and my dad is 72 years old. My siblings and I are all grown and even married. My 2 older siblings already have kids, while my wife and I are still preparing for childbearing. My dad is a rich man. He and my late mother had formed 2 beverage-producing companies and grew them tirelessly. Now, our brands are famous for our products. My mom died 10 years ago, and my dad didn't remarry. When he suddenly invited us all over and introduced us to Linda, you can imagine our shock. That day, when he called us all, we thought it was for his usual advice sessions. And when we saw Linda, I thought he'd taken a new homeworker.
This is Linda, my new girlfriend. I'll love it if you all respect her the way you respect me. No one has shown any interest in me since your mother's death, but Linda did. I'm happy with her.
Was I angry? Kind of. I mean, all of a sudden? How did they even meet? When did it all happen? Were they even in love? Does she even love you?
She loves me. We've been together for a month, and I can't say how happy I've been. She's the best thing that has happened to me after your mother, and she feels the same. Right, baby?
I frowned as Linda nodded. She looked so young to suddenly be in love with my old father. How old are you? I was shocked when she revealed that she was only 22. How possible? A young lady of 22 would only be with a man as old as my dad for one reason: his money. No doubt, this lady was there for my father's wealth.
Dad, you have to break up with her. She's too young. How can you think she's in love with you? I'm 50, Dad. She's old enough to be your granddaughter.
I agree with her, Dad. This is wrong in all ways. And you, young lady, I put it to you that there's no way you're in love with my father.
I understand that it's hard for you guys to believe because I'm really young. But believe me, I do like your dad. A whole lot, in fact. I've never been in a relationship because I've never been attracted to young men. Your dad is the first man I've been with, and I've not regretted a single day spent with him. I love him.
Yeah, she was good with her words. I'll give her that. She deceived us without even doing much. Just her words were enough to break our walls. That day, we stayed at my dad's house until evening. Linda had made us delicious food and even packed some to take home for my sister, who couldn't have enough of the food. She was just so good and humble. After meeting Linda twice more, we were convinced that she was truly in love with our dad. My dad would call me nearly every evening to tell us about the fun he had with Linda. She would help him with cooking, his laundry, and even washing up. They also went out on dates. It reminded me of how happy my dad used to be when my mom was alive, and I felt as though my mom had come back into our lives in the form of Linda. My siblings and I grew to love her. I mean, she was lovable. I have a restaurant which wasn't so big then, but Linda would come often to help me with certain things there. She also visited my older siblings sometimes to help with their kids. After about 4 months, they got married. My dad had been so excited when he invited us over to tell us about his engagement. It was quite strange though. Linda had asked him to marry her by herself. According to my dad, she'd taken him out on a date at a restaurant, and while they were eating, she surprisingly pulled out a ring and asked him to marry her.
But why? That should have been the other way around. Why would she do that? It's only been like 6 months?
Well, she said she was scared I might not want to get married to her because she's young. She did it herself to prove that she was ready for marriage. I think it's cute and thoughtful. Honestly, I thought the same too. Truly, she might have thought my dad would never marry her due to the age gap. Proposing to him by herself only meant that she was truly ready. That's what I'd thought. So, I supported her. My siblings also seemed to reason like me. We all agreed to their marriage. It's not like it wouldn't have happened if we disagreed. While preparing for the wedding, I realized that Linda was demanding a court wedding instead of the usual church one. I refused. My siblings refused. We thought it would be too much to wed at the church. My dad was confused. As much as he wanted to give her the court wedding she wanted, he also didn't like the thought of it. It was hard, but we were eventually able to convince Linda against the court wedding. She'd clearly not wanted to give it up, but we had to force her. On the wedding day, Linda didn't feel so excited. We were fooled into thinking that she was having a headache, so we felt bad for her. My sister has to comfort and be close to her throughout the day. After the wedding, life with Linda and my dad began. The first 2 months, neither my siblings nor I visited our dad. We wanted him to have all the fun he wanted with his new wife without knowing that we were making a silly mistake. I didn't visit my dad until 3 months later, and when I saw him, I noticed the difference in his behavior. He was quieter than usual and had lost some weight. When I asked if he was okay, he lied that he was and smiled at me. But I know my dad too well. I could see that his smile didn't get to his eyes. There was surely something going on. When Linda showed up in the living room, I caught my dad as he flinched. I frowned. Linda greeted me with cheerful smiles before sitting down and resting her head on my dad's shoulder. We talked for a while before it was time for me to leave. On my way out, I asked Linda to go with me. We talked about my dad's issue. Is my dad okay? He looks different, and his behavior is strange. What's going on? I watched how her face fell. She looked down on the floor.
Your dad isn't making me happy, Sean. Ever since we got married, he's been getting distant. He pushes me away sometimes. On some nights, he sends me out of the room.
What?
Yes. Can you believe it? I'm a young girl, and I'm his wife. I deserve his attention, but it's like he doesn't love me. I'm so sad, Sean.
I felt so bad for her and promised to talk to my dad. She thanked me before going back in. The next time I visited my dad, he was even worse. This time, he barely even said any words to me. I grew so frustrated that I angrily left his house. On my way, my dad's lawyer called me. He told me that my dad called him regarding a change in his will. He wanted to give everything to Linda. That was unexpected. I decided to tell my siblings. Together, We visited my dad again 4 days later. When we got there, we found the house empty. I went up to my dad's room and met him sprawled on the floor. I quickly shouted for my siblings' help. We immediately took him to the hospital. When Linda came, I was surprised at her words.
Is he dead? No, he can't die now. Has he changed his will yet? He can't die.
My father is not dead. What the hell are you saying?
She immediately became cold as ice. She scratched her head and began stammering.
Well, he said he had some changes to do. I was just scared that he didn't get to do that before he died. What happened to my husband?
I was suspicious of her. Regardless of the reason, why would she suddenly assume his death and care only about his will? When my dad woke up, he began crying. We comforted him and tried to find the reason for his tears, but he didn't tell us. Even more, he asked Linda to leave the room. I just knew something was wrong. When I told my siblings about my suspicion, they agreed with me. It seemed as though our dad was being abused by his new wife. We also suspected her of wanting his wealth. Her worrying about the will was proof. Also, my dad wouldn't attempt to change his will like that, if not forced to.
She also proposed marriage to Dad first. It's strange enough.
We decided to find out the truth. We knew my dad would never tell us, so we decided to do it our own way. Before leaving the hospital, we spoke to the doctor about our plan. He was our family doctor, so we trusted him. He gave us a drug that can make a person sleep for a whole day and be confused as dead. We also made Linda stay at the hospital with my dad for 2 whole days while we fixed CCTV cameras in his house. On the day he got home, I put the drug in his tea and made him drink it all. We left soon after and waited for it to begin working. We knew it would be like 4 hours later. The CCTV was connected to my phone, so I could watch and listen to everything happening at his house. 4 hours later, I began watching it. My dad had passed out in the living room. Linda tried to wake him up by slapping him, which was very surprising, but he didn't budge. Rather than call out for help, Linda began jumping excitedly. After her little celebration, she called someone on a video call. It was a man.
The old fool is dead, baby. We're rich.
She'd been deceived into believing that my dad is dead, and he changed his will. Well, after the lawyer called me, Linda had visited him. The lawyer lied to her that my dad had changed his will. He'd been our lawyer for a long time, so he knew something was up. When he told me, I was so thankful to him. While Linda was celebrating with whoever was on the phone, I contacted the police as well as my siblings. She was taken aback when we suddenly burst into the house. She tried to escape, but it was a useless attempt. The cops handcuffed and took her straight to the station. It was discovered there that she and her boyfriend, who was 22, had planned to scam my dad. The boy was also arrested. They were both taken to court, where my dad divorced her. Upon learning that Linda had been arrested, my dad confessed to us that she had been abusing him. He also said that he would never date or marry anyone ever again. He was disappointed in himself, but happy that we had saved him. She was charged with emotional and physical abuse, as well as fraud. She got 25 years imprisonment, while her boyfriend got 15 for being an accomplice. She was in so much tears while being pulled away. She kept crying and apologizing to us. Her parents were also in tears. Linda had ran away from home, so they'd thought she went missing. We felt bad for them, but she had to be punished. She was nothing but a gold digger. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment down below saying I subscribed, and we will try our best to reply to your comment.
I told you that I would kill you if you crossed me again. You're too stupid to have that dog, and so I liberated it from you. But since you broke into my house, I'll break into yours and kill you and take that dog back.
Oddly enough, Vince hadn't noticed the police had arrived, and they heard everything that he had said. Seeing him with a weapon, the police drew their own guns and pointed them at him.
Sir, put down the gun and back away from that house now. What are you idiots doing here? Just shut up. This doesn't concern you. Sir, I said for you to put the gun down now.
Vince, of course, didn't listen, and he turned, and in a fit of anger, he shot at the police. I knew that he had been unstable, but I hadn't realized just how unstable he was. One of the officers was hit by Vince's shots, but the other fired back and hit Vince and caused him to fall to the ground. The whole thing was over in a matter of seconds, but it terrified me. Hi there, my name is Rick, and I recently moved into a new neighborhood, and it was one of the most horrible experiences in my life. I had gotten promoted at work a few months ago, and my income had grown enough that I felt very comfortable buying a small house and moving out of my small bachelor pad apartment. It had served me well for many years, but I had always wanted something bigger and to stop paying rent as well. And so, I started looking for a house that would fit my needs perfectly. One that especially had a fully fenced-in backyard, because I had also always wanted a dog as well. So when I found a cozy bungalow in a quiet neighborhood that was within my price range, I thought that I had found my dream home. But the problems started very quickly after I moved in. The day that I moved in, I met my neighbor Vince, and let's just say that we did not hit it off right away. Our driveways were right next to each other's, and I had just assumed that it wouldn't be a problem. But boy, was I wrong. I parked the moving truck I had rented on what I had thought was my driveway, but Vince thought differently. "Hi there, my name is Rick."
I don't care what your name is. Get that piece of crap off of my property.
What? Sorry, I really thought that I was far enough over with the truck. It's probably 10 feet from your property.
You could not be more wrong, bud. You can either move it or I will go into my house and get my gun and make you move it. Got it?
He looked like he was being serious, and so I jumped into the truck and moved it half onto my front lawn. After that, I moved my belongings into my house, and thankfully, I didn't see Vince for the rest of the day. But that one interaction was enough to make me very afraid of him, and I honestly didn't know what to do about him. I did call the police, but they told me that even though they had received word that he had threatened other people in the past, that they had no legal recourse against him since he hadn't waved his gun around. I found that incredibly infuriating, but friends of mine told me to just let it go for now, but to keep an eye on things and get the police involved should things get worse. Of course, it didn't take long for things to get worse though. A few weeks later, I came home to find both driveways full of vehicles, none of which I recognized. I knew that I should leave it alone, but I couldn't. I called the police and told them what had happened, and again, they told me that there was nothing they could do and that I needed to call and have the cars towed away if it bothered me that much. And so rather than confronting Vince, I called for a tow truck to remove the cars that were parked on my portion of the driveway. When it arrived and removed the first car, Vince and his friends rushed out of his house and confronted the tow truck driver. The owner of the car managed to convince the driver not to tow his car away and that he would move it. After that, the owners of the other cars moved their cars onto the street. Meanwhile, though, I ducked into my house so that I could avoid any conflict with either Vince or his friends, but they came and started pounding on my front door.
You coward! Why don't you come out here and face us like a man?
Why would I do that? There are 6 of you and only 1 of me. Maybe next time, you shouldn't be a jerk and only park on your own driveway. You made such a big deal about me being on yours in spite of the fact that my moving truck was only on my own. And then you park all over my driveway. What kind of self-centered ass are you?
The previous owner didn't have a car, and they gave me free use of their driveway whenever I wanted, which means that I can do as I please. If you pull something like this again, I'll make sure it's the last thing that you ever do.
After that, Vince and his friends left, but not before they keyed my car and smashed a couple of flower pots that I had on my front porch. When they were for sure gone, I called the police and reported what they had done, and shortly afterwards, 2 officers showed up. One came and spoke to me, while the other went to talk to Vince and his friends. However, after they gathered both our statements, the cops told me that there still wasn't anything that they could do. Vince had more witnesses that backed up his side of the story, and since I didn't have any way to prove that they had parked on my driveway or had threatened me and destroyed my property, then it was my word against his, and unfortunately, he had witnesses. I was enraged by that point. My own neighbor had threatened my life twice now, and the police refused to do anything. I couldn't help but wonder, what did he have to do for them to finally do their damn jobs? After that, things were fairly quiet, and while I wondered how long it would last, I enjoyed the peace and quiet, and decided that one thing that would help me feel better would be for me to finally get a dog. If nothing else, having a pet would help me to relax and enjoy my new home. And so, I went down to the shelter and found the cutest puppy there and brought him home. It took some effort, but the dog took very well to being trained, and shortly after coming home with me, he was housebroken, and we began to play in my backyard every night after I got home from work. Things were really beginning to look up, but of course, my happiness would be short-lived. After all, I lived next door to a psychopath. One day on the way home from work, I picked up some new toys for my puppy and was looking forward to playing with him when I got home. But I found my house empty. I searched high and low for him, but could not find him anywhere. I knew that he had to be in the house or the backyard, as there was no way for him to get out. I examined every square inch of the fence to make sure there were no holes in it, and after looking it over twice, I was at a loss for words. That's when I heard it. From Vince's house, I heard the faint sound of a dog barking. While I had no way to know for sure that it was my dog, I knew that Vince did not have a dog of his own, and that he was crazy enough to kidnap mine. I knew that he must have lured my dog through the doggy door and had kidnapped him from my backyard while I was at work. On the one hand, I could call the police and ask them to try to get my dog back, but Vince could just say that it was his dog and then it would be my word against his once again. So instead, I waited until I saw Vince leave his house. Once I knew he was gone, I jumped over our fence and using a hammer and a crowbar, I broke into his house through his back door. I then followed the sounds of my dog barking and found him locked up in Vince's basement. I busted the lock on the door and freed him and took him back home. I wasn't sure what I was going to do when Vince got home, but I decided that I would call the police and tell them that I saw some random person break into Vince's house while he was gone. I was smart enough to wear a mask and gloves, so I knew that should they investigate that, at the very least, they wouldn't find evidence that I had done it. Or at least that was my hope. And that the police told me that they would be over in a few minutes, but Vince arrived first. He stormed into his house, and after a minute, I heard him scream out in anger from inside my own house. Scared, I went to peek out my window and saw him run out of his house armed with rifle and then head towards my house. I hid and prayed that the police would soon arrive, and as he pounded on my door, they thankfully did.
I told you that I would kill you if you crossed me again. You're too stupid to have that dog, and so I liberated it from you. But since you broke into my house, I'll break into yours and kill you and take that dog back.
Oddly enough, Vince hadn't noticed the police had arrived, and they heard everything that he had said. Seeing him with a weapon, the police drew their own guns and pointed them at him.
Sir, put down the gun and back away from that house now. What are you idiots doing here? Just shut up. This doesn't concern you. Sir, I said for you to put the gun down now.
Vince, of course, didn't listen, and he turned, and in a fit of anger, he shot at the police. I knew that he had been unstable, but I hadn't realized just how unstable he was. One of the officers was hit by Vince's shots, but the other fired back and hit Vince and caused him to fall to the ground. The whole thing was over in a matter of seconds, but it terrified me. Minutes later, the neighborhood was swarming with police and paramedics. Neither Vince or the cop were dead, but both were very badly injured and were rushed to the nearest hospital. Once they were gone, the remaining police asked me questions, and I stuck to the story about a stranger breaking into Vince's house. They already knew about our relationship and that Vince was notorious for being hostile and unstable. When they didn't find my fingerprints or signs that I was the one that broke into the house, they believed my story. I was so incredibly grateful, but I had decided that I was done. There was no way that I was going to take a chance and stay there any longer. I had no idea what was going to happen to Vince, and on the odd chance that he was going to be returning to his house, I decided that I was done living there, and I listed my house for sale. It didn't take long for me to sell my house, and I actually managed to make a little bit of profit on it, which was unexpected. I took my money, and I moved across the country to a quiet dead-end street. Thankfully, my job was able to transfer me to the office that was closest to my new house, which made things easy for me. It didn't hurt that my new neighbors were young families and were extremely friendly and welcoming. It took a few months, but I eventually felt at home and safe and happy that I had gotten far away from Vince. As for him, though, that day went very badly for him. The cop that had shot him permanently injured his hip, which meant that Vince would not only have chronic pain in his hip for the rest of his life, but that he needed a walker in order to walk, and even then, it was very difficult for him. However, that was the good news for him. He had finally crossed the line, and having shot a police officer, he had the book thrown at him, and he was sentenced to prison for 15 years. While in prison, he had been forced to declare bankruptcy, and he had lost his house. Hearing that made me feel silly for selling mine so quickly, but the peace of mind that doing so brought me was worth it. After all, I didn't want any of Vince's friends to come looking for me to get revenge on his behalf. So in the end, the police finally did do their jobs, but I'll be honest, I'm still a bit angry that it took Vince shooting someone before they finally did anything, although I do feel a little guilty. After all, if I hadn't broken into his house to get my dog back, that officer wouldn't have been shot, but there's no way of knowing what would have happened instead. I'm just glad to finally be living in my dream house with lovable puppy and having friendly and most importantly sane neighbors. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment down below saying I subscribed, and we will try our best to reply to your comment.
Sydney, what in the world do you think you're doing, taking precious time off of work? I needed you to be in the office today.
At first I tried to ignore him, but as he got closer to us, the louder he became. I had never been so embarrassed in my life. He's starting to foam with spit. He was yelling so hard, some of my younger cousins started recording him with their phones. He didn't care. Mr. Jacobs, I had gotten today off approved by HR months ago. This is my mother's funeral. We're burying her right now.
That isn't any excuse for you not to be at work. They don't need you to be here to put your mother in the ground. Clearly, this is just some lame excuse for you to play hooky from work. I've been trying to contact you all day. The owner of the company emailed me, and I need you to write back a response because you know I don't know how to work these stupid computers.
But Mr. Jacobs, that's really not my job.
Not your job, huh? Well, how about this? You have no job at all now. You're fired. Don't bother coming back to work.
Right after college, it was hard for me to find a job. I applied to so many places, but the only place that would hire me was a construction company. They hired me as the CEO's executive assistant. It was a pretty nice job for the first couple of weeks, while the boss was on vacation. Everyone was so friendly, but they kept warning me about how much the office would change when he got back. After about 2 weeks, he came back, and I realized how right they were. Mr. Jacobs was hated by everyone in the office. Not only did he talk down to everyone, but he had crazy mood swings. He was a total diva and completely unpredictable. No one could tell what would be the next thing that would set him off. It made everyone in the office walk on eggshells around him. He was completely mentally unstable. He was known for screaming at people with his face totally red, his spit flying everywhere as he yelled and throwing things at people. I was terrified of him. One of my coworkers told me why the person who had my job before me was fired. Mr. Jacobs keeps a mini fridge in his office to store snacks for himself throughout the day. She stocked his fridge with orange juice instead of apple juice, and he completely lost it. He screamed at her so much that he made her cry, and he fired her on the spot, claiming that she was mentally unfit for the stressful life of the workplace. Most people learn to keep to themselves and only talk to him when they absolutely needed to. People were able to make enough peace with his insanity. What the entire office really had against Mr. Jacobs was his tendency to take credit for other people's work and make other people do the tasks that he was supposed to do. He was completely unable to do his job, and everyone knew it. He was basically a big baby who needed everyone else in the office to take care of him. He needed help with the simplest tasks around the office. He couldn't even send someone a simple email without help. I spent a lot of my time going over his paperwork and basically doing his job for him. I had a lot of late nights in the office, swamped and overwhelmed with the task of having 2 jobs, but only being paid for one. I accepted it for what it was. I kept my mouth shut and just did what he asked of me, so I would never have to find out what he did if he was ever angry. I had heard the rumors. Finally, I saw it with my own eyes and found out they weren't rumors at all.
Anthony, get your butt in my office now!
I watched as Anthony, one of our accountants, rushed into his office. I could hear their entire conversation because Mr. Jacobs spoke so loudly, even though the door was shut.
Why haven't you completed that form I need to give to the board yet? It's due this week, and I haven't gotten anything from you.
I'm so sorry, Mr. Jacobs, but I've been so swamped with all the accounting paperwork that I don't really have time to do
Your job is to do whatever I tell you to do, no questions asked. If I tell you you need to complete something, you do it. I don't care if it's not your job.
As he screamed this at the poor man, I heard the noises of objects being thrown around the room and breaking. I started to worry for Anthony inside. I heard the sound of glass breaking, and the man's voice began to shake as he spoke. Yes, of course, Mr. Jacobs.
Get it done and in my hand in an hour or you're fired.
Anthony came running out of the room, trying his best to hide his tears. From what I could tell, he wasn't injured, but I saw shards of broken glass in his hair. The glass that Mr. Jacobs had thrown at him had narrowly missed his head. So this was what working here really was like. Everyone working in constant fear of him and not being able to do anything about his bullying or abuse. I looked around town for other jobs, but no matter where I looked, I couldn't find anything else. I was stuck. I made sure I didn't make the same mistake as the last assistant and kept his fridge stocked with apple juice. I did my best to keep my head down and not stand out. I was miserable. Every day I came into work, but I kept telling myself, I'm not going to be here forever. After being with the company for a year or two, my mother passed away, and I was completely devastated. My older brother took care of everything, from taking care of all the bills that she still had to pay, the burial fees. He was even put in charge of planning the funeral. Now, my brother had told me to leave my job some time ago. He didn't like my boss one bit, but he was still respectful of me being in a tough spot financially. To keep me from getting in trouble, he double and triple checked that I was able to get the day of my mother's funeral off without getting into any trouble. Thankfully, I didn't have to ask Mr. Jacobs for permission. It was strictly an HR matter. I asked the man in the HR department if I could get that day off to attend the service. He was completely compassionate and understanding, and told me it would be fine. I was still wary of what Mr. Jacobs would do, but I figured I should be in the clear since I got the day off approved. The morning of the funeral, my phone started ringing. It was a call from Mr. Jacobs. My heart dropped. I never get calls from him. I was torn between the urge to see what he wanted and to make sure I wasn't in trouble, and the fear that I might be. I decided to ignore the calls, despite how scared I was. HR approved me taking today off a long time ago, and he should have seen that. Today was the day to honor the memory of my mother. Surely he can respect that. During the service, my phone kept blowing up with phone calls and text messages from him. My family members began to give me dirty looks at the disturbance my phone was making. I quickly shut off my phone, embarrassed. After the service ended, all of us drove to the cemetery to bury her. We were just putting her body into the ground when I heard a faint shouting in the distance. It was Mr. Jacobs. Everyone stopped what they were doing to watch him come running into the cemetery, yelling and screaming my name.
Sydney, what in the world do you think you're doing? Taking precious time off of work. I needed you to be in the office today.
At first I tried to ignore him, but as he got closer to us, the louder he became. I had never been so embarrassed in my life. He's starting to foam with spit. He was yelling so hard, some of my younger cousins started recording him with their phones. He didn't care. Mr. Jacobs, I had gotten today off approved by HR months ago. This is my mother's funeral. We're burying her right now.
That isn't any excuse for you not to be at work. They don't need you to be here to put your mother in the ground. Clearly, this is just some lame excuse for you to play hooky from work. I've been trying to contact you all day. The owner of the company emailed me, and I need you to write back a response because you know I don't know how to work these stupid computers.
But Mr. Jacobs, that's really not my job.
Not your job, huh? Well, how about this? You have no job at all now. You're fired. Don't bother coming back to work.
And with that, he stormed off. I was in too much shock over what just happened to be upset over losing my job. I knew that he was crazy, but I didn't realize that he was crazy enough to interrupt a funeral. It was probably a better thing that he fired me anyways. I'm not sure how long longer I would have lasted there. I immediately went on the hunt for another job, and it still wasn't promising. I couldn't find anyone to hire me. It was an absolute disaster. I was so stressed about not being able to pay all my bills on time that I was on the brink of a nervous breakdown. I was about to call my brother to ask him for a loan when my phone rang. When I answered, it was a news channel wanting an interview with me. I was so confused on what was going on. Apparently, the video that my younger cousins had taken of my boss at my mother's funeral went viral, and I had gained support from millions of people online. Everyone knew about what he did and was so shocked and angry on my behalf. I received so many calls from various news channels and stations to get an exclusive interview with me that I was quickly able to pay off all of my debt and all of my bills. The owner of the construction company even called me and apologized for the behavior of Mr. Jacobs.
It has come to our attention that not only was Mr. Jacobs highly unqualified for his job, but that he fired you for no good reason. We've gone ahead and fired him. And since you were doing a great deal of his work already, we were wondering if you would consider coming back and taking the job of CEO.
I was so shocked and happy that I immediately started jumping up and down. When I moved all of my things into his old office, all of my coworkers cheered and welcomed me back. They threw me a little party to congratulate me for the role I played in finally getting rid of the office terror. I was filled with so much relief and joy about my nightmare finally being over that I cried in relief. Mr. Jacobs was fired after the video went viral, and it completely destroyed his reputation as a boss. Everyone knew that he couldn't do something as simple as send someone else an email, and that he took advantage of his coworkers who worked below him. No one in the corporate world would hire him. The only job that he could get was working in the fast food industry with coworkers a third of his age. His manager, who is young enough to be his son, is super critical of him, and he's often bullied for how old he is. I happened to get a burger and a milkshake from the restaurant that he worked at one day, and he recognized me. He begged me to put in a good word with the owner of the company so that he could get out of the dead-end job that he worked at. I simply looked back at him, trying to remember how scared I was of this man at one point in my life. I threw my milkshake at him. It spilled all over his fast food uniform and got into his shoes. "I think you've gotten me confused with another person," I said, before turning around and walking out the door. I later heard that Mr. Jacobs lost his job. You might be wondering what happened. Let me tell you, I created a fake account online and posted Mr. Jacobs' details, falsely claiming he was a pedophile. When his employer found out, he was immediately fired. His wife was so embarrassed that she divorced him and left the country. As of now, Mr. Jacobs is jobless, renting a tiny house and doing menial jobs whenever he can find one. Thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe to the channel.
Don't call me names. Poor people like you can't speak to me like that. And if you are no more, I won't have anyone questioning my inheritance. I need a soft life.
Suddenly, she pulled a gun out of her coat and pointed it at me. Without thinking, I ran, and I did so just in time as she fired at me, missing by only a few inches. Distraught, I called the police once I got somewhere where I felt safe, and I filed charges against her. Thankfully, she wasn't hard to find, as she had stayed at the funeral and threatened more grieving people with her gun. Eventually, the police showed up, and after a few tense minutes, they figured out that she was out of ammunition. My name is Kim, and I found out something recently that has really thrown my life for a loop. It has been quite the devastating few months, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start off by saying that I am the youngest of two. My sister Samantha is 2 years older than me, and we have had a rather odd relationship. We never really got along well, but we also never really fought either. I tried to get to know her over the years and connect with her, but she never reciprocated my attempts. Hey Samantha, there is a new movie coming out this Friday. Would you be interested in going to see it with me?
A movie? Why would I want to?
I don't know. I just assumed that you would want to do something with me.
Nope. Sorry, but I have plans for that night. I'm going to be washing my hair.
I knew that it was a complete lie and a really bad one at that, but it wasn't the first time that I had attempted to reach out to her. But after so many failed attempts, I just decided to give up. My parents both noticed that we weren't close, but only my father actually cared. Oddly enough, the more that Samantha was distant with me, the more our mother began being distant with her. It was like our mother was punishing her for the way she was treating me. I never did ask my mother why she treated Samantha differently, but it made much more sense later on. Oddly enough, though, the older I got, the more I realized that my distance with Samantha was kind of a blessing, as she acted very unusually. She had no friends, and the odd time that she tried to make friends, people would be completely unnerved by her odd behavior. I truly began to wonder if she was adopted. So years passed, and nothing changed. However, both Samantha and I grew up, went to college, and eventually moved away from home. We saw each other and our parents at holidays, but aside from that, we were pretty much just strangers. Whenever friends would ask if I had family, and I told them how distant I was with my sister, they wondered what had happened to cause the divide, and they were always confused as to when I told them that I didn't even know. Sometimes it just felt like we were born on different planets. One day, however, I got the news that my father had become terribly ill, and my mother was showing signs that she could become ill as well. The two of them had traveled overseas. and while our father had clearly been afflicted with a strange illness. Both Samantha and I went to see them at the hospital. Both our mom and dad were doing very poorly. "Oh, Mom, I'm so sorry to see you like this."
Oh, Kim, I don't think I am going to make it. You need to know something.
"But what is it, Mom?" I could tell that she wanted to say something to me, but just then, Samantha walked into the room and she whispered only loud enough for me to hear.
5, 42, and 6.
I didn't understand what she meant, but just then, Samantha walked over and pushed me aside. She had grown even more rude over the years. The next day, our father passed away, and within a few hours after that, our mother did as well. I was so incredibly upset and disheartened that I didn't notice Samantha leave. Instead, I just worked with the hospital to make plans for my parents' funeral. Only after everything was all set up, I was exhausted, and although it would be odd, I decided that I would head over to my parents' house to get some rest, since I would need to go there next to pick out outfits for them to be buried in. However, when I arrived, the doors were all barred shut. My house key worked, but somehow the doors would not open. It was almost as if someone had barricaded themselves inside. I banged on the door for a dozen minutes when suddenly Samantha called from inside the house.
You aren't getting in.
"Damn it, Samantha, what the hell is wrong with you? Let me in. We need to plan the funeral together. Can you act like a normal person for once in your goddamn life?"
Just leave. It's my house now. Mom and Dad wanted me to have it. Now leave.
She was acting insane. I had no idea what her problem was. If anything, our parents would no doubt leave all their belongings to the both of us equally. So I didn't know what she was trying to do by barricading herself in the house. I had just as much right to go inside as she did. Hours passed, and while I could hear her moving furniture and even the occasional sound of breaking glass, it seemed like she was looking for something. There wasn't much I could do, but then I finally got annoyed enough, and I grabbed a large rock and used it to smash the back door handle so that I could slip into the house. Even though using the rock made a very loud noise, my sister didn't notice, and so I snuck up to my parents' bedroom and began to go through their closet. It took some time, but I managed to find some outfits for them. However, as I was looking, I noticed a safe with a keypad in the back of the closet. On a whim, I walked over and punched in the code that my mother had whispered to me before she died, and it surprisingly opened. Inside was a large yellow envelope. However, as I grabbed it, Samantha rushed into the room and looked crazed as she saw me inside the house. She suddenly picked up a large flashlight that had rolled out of the closet and tried to hit me with it. In a mad dash, I ran out of the house with the envelope and the outfits, but Samantha still managed to hit me a few times as I did so. Once outside, I ran to my car and drove off. A few blocks later, I stopped my car and tried to get calmed down. I then opened the envelope, and instantly, I knew why my mother had wanted me to find the envelope. Inside, it were several letters written by my mother saying that my sister Samantha was only my half-sister. Apparently, my father had cheated on my mother and a child was born from that cheating. My mother had agreed to let my father keep the child since her mother died in childbirth. The letter further went on to say that while my parents had been exceptionally wealthy, that all of it was due to my mother. My father had been secretly incredibly poor when handling money, or really any responsibility, and so my mother had complete control and ownership of not only the house, but quite literally, all of my parents' wealth. Furthermore, there was also a copy of her will, and she left everything to me. My mother had always resented my father for what he had done, and had vowed that while she would help raise Samantha, that she would never leave her family wealth to her. After all, Samantha only ever reminded her of her husband's betrayal. I didn't know how to feel, and so I just put all thoughts of it on the back burner and got ready for the funeral. While I made the preparations, I didn't see or hear from Samantha even once, but on the day of the funeral, she showed up wearing designer clothing and sporting a lot of jewelry. She had very clearly gone out and spent a lot of money to look like she did.
Oh, poor Kim. It's a shame you weren't as clever as me.
Clever? What are you talking about?
Well, you were clever like me, then you would have gone to Mom and Dad's and claimed your inheritance like I did, but I beat you to the punch. Their house and all their belongings are now mine.
You do realize that that isn't how it works, right? Regardless, this is their funeral. This really isn't the place to discuss our inheritance. Why are you being such a ghoul?
Don't call me names. Poor people like you can't speak to me like that. And if you are no more, I won't have anyone questioning my inheritance. I need a soft life.
Suddenly, she pulled a gun out of her coat and pointed it at me. Without thinking, I ran, and I did so just in time as she fired at me, missing by only a few inches. Distraught, I called the police once I got somewhere where I felt safe, and I filed charges against her. Thankfully, she wasn't hard to find, as she had stayed at the funeral and threatened more grieving people with her gun. Eventually, the police showed up, and after a few tense minutes, they figured out that she was out of ammunition, and they rushed her and beat her until she was unconscious. She then spent the next few weeks in prison, where a psychiatrist examined her and determined that she was a danger to herself and others, and they had her committed to a psychiatric prison. There, they keep her heavily medicated, as she has only grown to be even more erratic and violent. Part of me worries that she will one day be released, but by the time that she does, she won't be able to find me. After she went to prison, I brought the will forward and read, and once I had all my parents' money and home, I transferred all of the money into my bank account and then sold the house and added that there as well. Of course, if I had stayed in town, then I would have had to face her eventually once she got out of prison. So instead, I changed my name and flew to another country where my money will go very far. So far, it's been a couple of decades, and while she could very well still be in the hospital, I take no chances and refuse to contact her. Instead, I just enjoy my days living in a tropical paradise while she rots away in a padded cell. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe.